Hello, I'm Don Baker, and I want to invite you to this journey class on the letter to the Philippians. In addition to studying the letter to the Philippians together, we will also be learning how to study the Bible. And basically, there are three different methods of Bible study. The first of those is an inductive Bible study. And in an inductive study, what we're trying to do is let the passage speak for itself. And so we open our Bible and we come to a passage of scripture and we ask it to answer our questions. We come to it without any preconceived ideas and just allow the text to lead us and inform us. And we come and say, well, what is this passage trying to teach us? Another method of Bible study would be the deductive Bible study. And in a deductive Bible study, you begin with an idea or a theory, and then you open the Bible to see if your theory is correct. You're looking for evidence to prove what you believe or what your idea is. And then another type of Bible study you could call the topical Bible study. And that is that we want to study some topic. Say, I want to study the topic of prayer. So I would come to the Bible and I would look for all the passages that I could find on prayer. And then I would study them and say, okay, this is what I have now learned about prayer. I think that sometimes there is a good reason to do topical study. But otherwise, I'm going to admit a bias here and say that I believe that most Bible study should be done inductively. Let the Bible tell us, let the Bible lead us. So how do you do an inductive Bible study? The first step is to take an overview of the passage. You know, when I have friends come from out of town and they want me to bring them to Disney World, I first like to give them an overview of the whole Disney World because they have come, they don't realize how big it is, they don't realize what it entails, they don't realize that there's a lot of different parts to it. And so I will take them on a tour going through the resorts, driving around, stopping at some of the places just to get an idea of what it really is. Well, we can do that with a passage of the Bible too. For example, as we're studying the book of Philippians, we want to begin by reading the whole thing and then saying, what are the themes here? What are the major ideas? What are we going to expect to find as we do this study of the Bible? Then once you have taken an overview, the next step would be to find the divisions. All right, so this is the entire book of Philippians. Now let's break it down into divisions. Now somebody has divided it into chapters for us. I don't always think they've done a very good job of that. They also have divided it into verses. I don't know how they ever came to decide where verses should be, but a lot of times they're not very helpful. Today, we're going to take these first two steps, overview and find the divisions, and we are going to take a shortcut. There are some very good teaching videos on the internet made by the Bible Project, and they have some great introductions. And one of those is to the letter to the Philippians, and so I would like to have us view that together. Let's watch.
Paul's letter to the Philippians. The church in Philippi was the first Jesus community Paul started in Eastern Europe, and that story is told in Acts chapter 16. Philippi was a Roman colony in ancient Macedonia. It was full of retired soldiers, and it was known for its patriotic nationalism. And so there Paul faced resistance when he was announcing Jesus as the true king of the world. And after Paul moved on from there, those who became followers of Jesus continued to suffer resistance and even persecution, but they remained a vibrant community faithful to the way of Jesus. Paul sent this letter from one of his many imprisonments, and for a very practical reason. The Philippians had sent one of their members, Epaphroditus, to take a financial gift to Paul to support him in prison. And Paul sent back this letter with Epaphroditus to say thank you and to do a whole lot more. The design of this letter doesn't develop one single idea from beginning to end like many of Paul's other letters. Rather, Paul has arranged a series of short, reflective essays or vignettes, and they all revolve around the center of gravity in this letter, which is a poem in chapter 2. It artistically retells the story of the Messiah's incarnation, his life, death, and resurrection, and exaltation. And then in each of these vignettes, Paul will take up key words or ideas from that poem to show how living as a Christian means seeing your own story as a lived expression of Jesus' story. So Paul opens the letter with a prayer of gratefulness, and he thanks God for the Philippians' generosity, for their faithfulness, and he expresses his confidence that the life-transforming work that God has begun in them will continue into greater and more beautiful expressions of faithfulness and love. And Paul then focuses on their obvious concern at the moment, which is his status in prison. Being in a Roman prison was no picnic, but it paradoxically has turned out for good to advance the good news about Jesus. So all of the Roman guards, the administrators, they all know that Paul's in prison for announcing Jesus as the risen Lord. And his imprisonment, it's inspired confidence in other Christians to talk about Jesus more openly. And Paul's optimistic that he will be released from prison, but it's possible that he could be executed. And as he reflects on it, that actually wouldn't be so bad, because for me, Paul says, life is the Messiah. And so dying would be a gain. For Paul, his life in the present and in the future, it's defined by the life and love of Jesus for him. And so if he's executed, that means he'll be present with Jesus, which would be great for him. And if he's released, well, that would mean he could keep working to start more Jesus communities, which would be better for other people. And so that's what he hopes for. And notice how his train of thought works here. Dying for Jesus is not the true sacrifice for Paul. Rather, it's staying alive to serve others. And so that's Paul's way of participating in the story of Jesus, to suffer in order to love others more than himself. Paul then turns to the Philippians, and he urges them to participate in Jesus' example by taking up this same mindset. He says, your life as citizens should be consistent with the good news about the Messiah. So these Christians in Philippi, they were living in a hotbed of Roman patriotism, but their way of life was to be shaped by another king, Jesus. And that might bring persecution, but they are not to be afraid, because suffering for being associated with Jesus, it's a way of living out the story of Jesus himself. Which leads Paul into the great poem of chapter 2. It's rich with echoes of Old Testament texts, specifically the story of Adam and his rebellion in Genesis 1 through 3, and the poems about the suffering servant in the book of Isaiah. This poem is worth committing to memory. It is a beautifully condensed version of the gospel story. So before becoming human, the Messiah pre-existed in a state of glory and equality with God. And unlike Adam, who tried to seize equality with God, the Messiah chose not to exploit his equal status for his self-advantage. Rather, he emptied himself of status. He became a human. He became a servant to all. And even more than that, he allowed himself to be humiliated. He was obedient to the Father by going to his death on a Roman execution rack. But through God's power and grace, the Messiah's shameful death has been reversed through the resurrection. And now God has highly exalted Jesus as the King of all, bestowing upon him the name that is above all names, so that all creation should recognize that Jesus the Messiah is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now, that last statement is astounding. Paul's quoting from Isaiah chapter 45. It's a passage where all creation comes to recognize the God of Israel as Lord. Paul's point here is very clear. In the crucified and risen Jesus, we discover that the one true God of Israel consists of God the Father and the Lord Jesus. And so for Paul, this poem, it expresses his convictions about who Jesus is, and it does more. It offers the example of Jesus as a way of life that his followers are to imitate. And so that's why Paul immediately goes on to tell two stories. First about Timothy, then about Epaphroditus, because they are both examples of people living out Jesus' story. So Timothy's like Jesus because he's constantly concerned for the well-being of other people more than his own. And Epaphroditus, who the Philippians sent with their gift, he ended up risking his life to serve Paul in prison. He got so sick he almost died trying to help Paul. But God had mercy on him and Paul by sparing him the loss of a friend. Paul's point here is that these are the kinds of people who are living, breathing examples of the story of Jesus, and they are worthy of imitation. Paul then turns to his own story as an example. So those Christians who had been demanding circumcision of non-Jewish Christians, remember his letter to the Galatians, these people are still stirring up trouble for Paul, and they keep reminding him of his own past, when he used to persecute Jesus' followers, when he tried to show his right standing before God by his zealous obedience to the laws of the Torah. But like Jesus, Paul has given up all of that status and privilege. He now regards all of it as filth, and the word he uses is actually much less polite. He's given it all up to become a servant, like Jesus, to participate in his suffering and sacrificial love. And he does all of it in the hope that Jesus' love will carry him through death and out the other side into resurrection. So Paul says that for followers of Jesus, their true citizenship is in heaven, which for Paul does not mean that we should all hope to get away from earth and go to heaven one day. Rather, heaven is the transcendent place where Jesus reigns as king. And he says we're eagerly awaiting our royal Savior to come from there and return here to bring his kingdom of healing justice and transforming love to bring about a new creation. Paul then challenges the Philippians to keep living out the Jesus story. He first addresses two prominent women leaders in the church who worked alongside Paul, and they're in some kind of conflict. And so Paul pleads with them to follow Jesus' example of humility, to reconcile and become unified. Paul then urges the Philippians not to give in to fear, but despite their persecution, to vent all of their emotion and their needs to God, who will give them peace. And that peace, Paul says, it comes by focusing your thoughts on what is good and true and lovely. There's always something that you could complain about, but a follower of Jesus knows that all of life is a gift and can choose to see beauty and grace in any life circumstance. Which leads Paul to his conclusion. He again thanks the Philippians for their sacrificial gift, and he wants them to know that his imprisonments, that his times of poverty, that these are not true hardships for him. They've actually become his greatest teachers, showing him that no matter his circumstances, he has learned the secret of contentment. It's simple dependence on the one who strengthens him. Paul has come to see his own suffering as a participation in the story of Jesus. The letter to the Philippians gives us a unique window into Paul's own heart and mind. He saw his entire life as a reenactment of the story of Jesus. And you can sense in this letter his close connection to Jesus, his awareness that Jesus' love and presence is closer than his own skin. And that's what gave him hope and humility in his darkest hours. And so Paul shows us that knowing Jesus is always a deeply personal, transforming encounter. And that's the kind of Jesus that Paul invites others to follow. And that's what Paul's letter to the Philippians is all about.
Well, that is our overview, and the way that I think we will divide this study as we begin. And I would like to begin with that poem that Paul says is right there in the middle of the passage. So our next step is going to be observing, and we'll start with that poem. And in observing, we're asking these questions: what, who, what, where, when, why, and how. Now, if you have not yet done so, I would like to ask you to print out the manuscript that is connected with this study. It's a manuscript of the book of Philippians. I have not put in chapters and verses because those are not things that are original to the book of Philippians. Those were added much later. And if you would open that and turn to page 3, at the top of page 3, we have this poem or hymn that Paul either writes or quotes, we're not sure. But I'd like to begin by studying that. And this is where we get to start to have some fun. You'll need some colored pencils or colored markers. And we're going to use those as tools to help us observe what we can, as much as we can, here in this passage. So, first of all, let's just ask the question, what are the characters that we find in this passage? Well, you'll find that one of them, the who that is referred to, is Jesus Christ himself. And so just circle that. Now, you'll want to put another circle around God, because he's certainly a character in this passage, in this poem. And then I notice one more character, and that is everyone. That's you and I. So here are the different people that are involved in this passage. So now the next step, let's get out another color. And I like to look for the actions of each character. What is Jesus doing in this passage? Let's find all the action words that we can. First of all, we see that he did not consider. So underline that. Another thing is he made himself nothing. What else do you see? Well, he took the very nature of a servant and he humbled himself. All of those are the actions of Jesus. What about God the Father? What did he do? Well, in this passage, here's another one for Jesus. He became obedient, even obedient to death. Okay, what did God the Father do? Well, he exalted Jesus to the highest place. He did that. And he gave to Jesus a name that is above every name. And are we doing in this passage? Well, it isn't what we have done, but what we should be doing. One is that every knee should bow and everyone should acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord. So now we're starting to get this colored quite a bit. Now we begin to look at let's see what else we can find here. One thing I like to look for is repetition. Do you see any words that are repeated over and over again? I certainly see one, and that would be the word every. So I like to circle that, just connect those. So I see that, no, every name, every knee, every tongue, it's significant. What else do you notice as you're trying to make observations here? Well, I would also look for contrasts. And to do that, notice this word rather. That word signals to me that there's a contrast here. What's being contrasted? You see it? Well, the nature of God is being contrasted with the nature of a servant. Well, there's probably some other things being contrasted there too, and you can look for those. I'm looking for cause and effect, and this word therefore tells me that there is a cause and effect somewhere. What is the cause and what's the effect? Well, the cause is that Jesus was obedient to death, and then the effect is that he is exalted to the highest place. This word and, that should alert you to something, that there's a progression. We're moving from one to another. What's the progression? You figure that out. You find a way that you want to mark that. I also like to find important words. One of them, I think it's very important, is this word humbled. What does that mean? Do I fully know what that word means? Maybe I want to look that up. Now, I'm going to give you some time to work on this on your own and see what more you can find. So take time to see what you can. And just a note, the shapes and the colors and things like that you use don't matter at all. You're using your markers as a tool to help you observe. And so there's no right or wrong way to do it. Do whatever helps you. Find what you can. Mark as much as you can. I will say this, the more you mark, the better you will, the more that you mark it up, the more you will see. Then there is also in your resources a page that may help you. It's called The Laws of Composition, and it's a very good resource to help you know what kinds of things to look for. So I'd like to ask you now to just take this and for at least 10 minutes, mark up your manuscripts and see how much that you can find.
Okay, let's come back together. And let me just ask this. Did anyone see anything here that they hadn't seen before? Yeah, Bill.
And it hinges on the appearance,
Uh-huh.
being found in appearance as a man. Before, he was talking about he was made in likeness, but he didn't say, but that is not said he is like a man. He has appeared as a man, so that he had debased himself of his godliness, so that he could experience as we would experience, not as someone from outside looking in.
Excellent.
I can look like you, but I can't be you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do either, but.
Yeah. But now he does. Yeah, okay. Yeah, right.
So that's interesting, is the use of like or as.
Yes. And those are, like and as are great words to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. They give us great clues.
And then if you follow that down further, is that in the last line, it says that Christ is the Lord. So you move from a likeness to an as to an is.
Excellent. Yes.
I see it as a mountain, a valley, if you will, the shadow of death, and back to the mountain.
Oh, that's a good illustration. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Good analogy.
I like the, halfway down or so, it says, being made in human likeness, as you said. So I wrote next to it, so should we, because he was an example of humanness. So I felt like that was a message to say, we should be a servant, humbled, obedient, and all those other words there. As
Yeah.
because he was a human likeness, and I just thought, so should we be humble, obedient, and servant.
Sure, and when we see this in context, it starts with your attitude should be the same as Jesus Christ, who being in very nature.
And I found those as a progression. Because he progressed and he made himself nothing. Okay. He took the nature of a servant, the likeness, the appearance as, and becoming obedient. So there's a progression. And then finally becoming obedient, and finally death. And so there's a progression in that poetry.
And I think the progression, it says obedient to death, and then even death on a cross, which is even more.
Oh, horrible.
Yeah,
more,
right.
Higher.
Yeah, not an easy death.
Yeah. That's the extraordinary. I mean, went to the extreme, if you will.
No hospice care.
Yeah.
One of the contrasts that we didn't really talk about was in line 4, that he became nothing. And yet down further he gets exalted. So you see that phenomenal contrast between the two.
Yeah, and something I just saw now that I hadn't seen before also is it says that he didn't use this to his own advantage, but if you look down below, now he is exalted to the highest place and every knee is bowing, so in a sense it did turn out for his advantage. Yeah.
Only after all those other things happened.
Right, right,
It's a long road.
yeah.
But also kind of reminds me, I guess I'm focusing back on the word nothing, is that we are defined as human beings as nothing.
Mm.
We become the very nature of a servant, we are human likeness, we appear to be a man, we humble ourselves, we're obedient, we are nothing. Who's exalted is not us, it's the Lord.
Well, that's a big, yeah, that's really good, Mark. Because when you talk about it, when we're talking about what does that word humble mean, that he was humbled, it really means he became like us.
And if we're puffing ourselves up, that's not what this is saying.
Yeah.
This is saying we are nothing.
But
And
why would
sometimes
he,
human
why,
nature wants to puff ourselves up.
but
Yes,
why
John.
would he consider us as nothing when he is the Almighty and he loves us to pieces? And we are something to him. We are all, we are everything to him. We are love. God
Good
is
point.
love.
Why would he die for nothing?
Right. Why
Yeah.
would
Good question, John.
why would he die
Why
for
would he?
nothing when he didn't have to?
Yeah. Okay.
He is great, he is full of love. He is us, he is we are his. We are his children, You wouldn't do that to your child, and God is the Almighty. He loves us. He would never do us that way.
Well, you raise a good question, and let me just say that at this point, when you're observing, you don't have to answer the question. You just have to ask it. And it's okay to have some of these questions sitting in the air like that, because,
You could write them down.
obviously, pardon?
Or you could write them down.
You're
You can
putting-
write them down.
Yeah.
But you've got a big question here. What is humility? Humility for Jesus is becoming like us,
Which is nothing.
becoming nothing.
But
and
if you
Then
want-
why would he do it?
I also
Yeah,
think,
why, if you
though, I
want,
think
if you're asking questions
Yeah.
and no reason to ask them, why ask them?
Oh, well, I didn't say we won't try and answer them. I'm just saying at this
So what's the
point,
use?
right now we're observing
we're gonna learn.
and we're gonna learn. But by asking big questions like this, we come to some conclusions that we hadn't seen before. So that's why we're asking them, because the Bible is raising issues. And there are people who are asking that very question. Why would he die for me? That's a big question. And so at this point, we don't have to be afraid of any question. We can ask any question. And we're gonna look for answers, and we will, but it's okay to not answer them right away.
Or to even find out that there are no answers for us right now.
We can struggle.
Yes.
But I
Yep.
think also, this is not
Yeah.
Jesus saying, I became a man and nothing. It's Paul describing Jesus coming to us as a man.
That's a good point.
And he's making him as unvaluable as Paul feels himself to be.
Mhm.
He's not, and he doesn't say that that's where he was, he says that this is where he ended up.
Mhm.
But he had to come down here to end up here. But it's Paul's description of Jesus, not Jesus' description of himself.
Very good point.
And not Jesus' description of us.
Right.
Right, so that was Paul was saying, so perhaps Paul is saying, I'm nothing, but Jesus never said we were nothing.
Yeah,
To the second question I'm gonna ask when I get to
okay,
that.
all right.
But nothing,
My
nothing seems
first
to be
question is
related to
always, am I
servant.
early?
Yeah, and servant,
Nothing and servant seem to be, and certainly servants aren't nothing, so, I mean, that's his definition of what nothing is, by
Sure.
taking the very nature of a servant.
and we know that Jesus encouraged that, Jesus said we should. So, yeah, all right.
I'm so drawn to that line though, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage.
Yeah.
Of course, which Adam did. But, people do need to humble themselves in order to rise again.
Yeah, certainly, we try to lift ourselves above others. And we want people to see us as the best, as the top, we want to be the winner.
The world does revolve around me.
I know that, Mark, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you. No, that's kind of that mentality that, we've got, that's why I went back to that word nothing.
Yeah.
Because we so focus ourselves that we are so great and so smart and so good and so wealthy and whatever you want to call it, but we're really nothing in comparison
Nothing in comparison, yes.
to the exaltation.
Nothing in comparison, I think that's
And-
very important.
And then coming close on the heels of, or fast approaching Martin Luther King Day, was it he who had the speech, I am somebody? Was that was Martin Luther King's speech? Because the second line, of that was, I think it was a double negative, I am not nobody. And he had the continued of, I am somebody, I am somebody. And so, again, what do we have as nobodies and somebodies? And we have the answer to that. But again, that was the observation, that was Paul's observation of what humans were, not Christ's observation of what humans were, or God's observation.
I'm gonna move now and just say, here is the next part after we do our observation, and we can spend a lot more time on the observation, but would be interpretation. And so what did you see that you had not seen before? We've talked about some of those things, but what questions did this raise? What does this say about Jesus, God, and me? How would you answer that? What did you see here? What is this passage saying about Jesus, about God, about me?
Jesus' obedience to the Father,
All right, obedience.
willingness to humble himself.
As it said in the video, it's the story,
Huh?
if you will. It's the story of the gospel, who Jesus was and what
Sure.
he did, what he went through. So it's just telling all the story of Jesus.
Okay,
He said to memorize it so we could tell people.
This is the Paul's equivalent of the elevator speech.
yeah.
That's a lot to say in an elevator.
What's it say about God?
He loved us as much as John says he loved us.
Yeah. But also, what about that last line?
It's about his glory.
Yeah.
In hopes that every knee will bow and confess.
And every tongue, which is the world.
Yes.
But as they are glorifying Jesus, as they are acknowledging Jesus, the glory is going to God the Father. And The purpose of everything is to glorify God.
Chief and evangelist?
Good Presbyterian answer.
What was that? What did you say?
There is only
She
one way
fed
I would
mankind.
answer. There is only one way that I would answer, regardless of what it meant to somebody else in this room, that Jesus is the Son of God, and God is our all-powerful. And that's the only way I would answer that, no matter what it meant to you or what it meant to that. That's the only way I would answer to anybody. And you are a great teacher. You would be a great teacher.
Why is it important that Jesus humbled himself? How would life be different if he hadn't? Why is that so important?
Well, that's the whole question of sin. We weren't getting any better, so he came. And we haven't been doing great since
No,
then
we haven't.
either.
Well, what if he had come and said, I am God, and now I'm going to give my life for you, bow down?
We wouldn't have. It
Just
would,
say,
that
"Yeah,
would have
right."
happened.
But the Jews expected him to be strong,
They didn't, yeah.
so
To
they were
show power.
disappointed. They were very disappointed and distrusted him. That's not the nature of God. He's not here to
Force us.
force, we have free will, but then of course there's something to, what's the word I wanna say? Judgment, come along if we don't go in the right direction, but, we do have, and he gives us things that we want, if we want them, and say, okay, now here, go ahead.
Knock yourself out.
And you will.
Difference between empathy and sympathy is that I can empathize with with Mark having to run around with this piece of equipment, but I really can't sympathize with him because I don't have to run around with the thing on my back. And so if Jesus had not humbled himself, then the argument would always be, but you're not feeling what I'm feeling. You can observe what I'm feeling, but you're not feeling what I'm feeling. So if I don't know thirst, I don't know what it means when it says you're thirsty. Okay? I mean, even today with me particularly, I don't feel pain like other people feel pain. So when someone says they have a kidney stone and they're in a fetal position on a fetal position on a bed, weeping openly and taking massive counts of drugs. I did 4 of those in the past year, and I took no medication for it whatsoever. I don't feel pain, so when you say this hurts, I'm going to suck it up, Ace. Because I don't feel that. So if Jesus couldn't feel what we were feeling,
Yeah, well, thank you, Bill.
We won't look for sympathy.
We'll go in your direction.
that's why
he
had to humble himself.
Okay.
I thought the difference between empathize and sympathize
He
is.
mixed them up.
Oh,
I
okay.
mixed them up, okay.
Yeah, cause I
Yeah,
can feel
okay.
sympathy for Mark, I can't empathize with him because I
Okay.
don't have
Yeah.
the same problem.
Yeah. I reversed them, I
Okay,
apologize.
no, I just wanted to
Sympathy and
clarify.
empathy.
I mean, that's what I interpreted,
Yeah,
as the middleman here.
He came up to me and said, so you've had COVID. I says, if I had COVID, I would be dead today.
Yeah, he
So
would be
that's
dead
why I
too.
did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last step is, here's another, what is the main point of this passage? And how would you answer that? What's the main point, and why does Paul consider this to be so important?
If we don't understand the nature of Jesus and what he did, what he gave up for us, how can we appreciate his love for us?
and the nature of God, and who God is. It tells their
Mhm.
the story of
Mhm.
It also reminds us in the first line that Jesus is God.
Yeah.
Who being in the very nature of God.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So if there's ever a question about if he's not God, he is, says Paul.
Yes, yes. And then we want to do application, and so here's some questions there. What difference does Jesus' humility make to me? What should I do about it? Or is there anything in my life that I want to change in light of what I've read? How can I use this teaching in my life? Those are some application questions. Any thoughts there as you look at this today? How would you apply this passage?
Now, if our Savior came from being equal with God, being God, whatever, came down to be a
Mhm.
man and lived as a humble servant,
Mhm.
and we're just lowly mortals,
Mhm.
we need to serve. We need to be humble. We need to be servants.
Yeah, if Jesus didn't put himself above us, why should we?
Right.
A lot of that understanding, though, I think, comes from things that have happened in your own life. You know, I use the analogy of AA, where you have to hit bottom,
Mhm.
and then you realize how important it is to be humble and work from there,
Mhm.
and to be on your knee and work from there. Whereas if you're up here and
Mhm.
everything's good, but you're nervous about how you're gonna stay here, you know, I just in my own life, I've found that I needed to lose stuff in order to understand.
That makes sense.
And this is a key step. Sometimes we just love to observe and read and interpret, and then our Bible study stops.
We don't never.
Instead of doing the application,
Right.
which I think is probably one of the most important steps.
Well, everything leads to it. This
Exactly.
is the climax of your Bible study.
Yes.
That we let Scripture change us. Yeah.
We just talked about that in Sunday school, we're doing a study on, today it was about Judges, so we just drew Judges, the book of Judges, and Nancy Guthrie is the lady's name. And she brought up the point, you know, we can be remorseful, we can be about our sin, we can cry big alligator tears, and we can be all kinds of things, but are we changing through that? Once we realize that, once we, you know, we can ask God for help and all, but, you know, and it's like a little kid was, you know, they're sorry they got caught, basically. And so, but they don't change their behavior because they're gonna do it again when nobody's looking. But, so that's your point, I guess, about
Yeah.
what has changed, or what kind of change should we have in our lives.
In those days, everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you know how many Presbyterians it takes to change a light bulb?
I don't know. Do they have to really want to change. I know that.
1 to change it, and 3 to reminisce over the old one.
Well, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. Take this home. Mark up the first 3 pages and come back and we'll discuss it. If you don't have any markers at home, you may borrow some of the ones that are loose, not the ones in the packets, if you need to.
Cheap ones at home is what he was saying.
Yeah, well, those cost me real money. The others were a little less. So if you need to borrow some, that's okay. But mark it up, do the first 3 pages, come back and let's discuss what you see next week. All right?
Thank you very much.
Okay.